You'll have to excuse me. I was just having a spotted dinner. And, oh, the police custody record. Wish I hadn't done that. I usually prefer to save this when I'm wiping my ass. So, that's my excuse for not saying the title of the video up front, because I don't have one. So just to make it clear, the first job that I ever actually wanted in life, as far as I could remember, was actually to be a police officer, to be a Paluche, part of the best and brightest. I assume, psychoanalyzing that now, I assume that's just because I, being a quiet kid in school and when I was a child, like when I first got there, the way that other kids kind of process that is if they can't communicate with you, they'll try anything else, maybe potentially even make fun of you in some of the cases. And I always found the outside world like a very big assault on my person. Whether it was ever intended that way or not by any other human being, that was just always the way that I perceived things like that had always happened for me. And so just the idea of being a police officer and being the one who helps the little guy and stands up for what's right, that always really meant something to me. And obviously at such a young age, whilst you can't process these things, you see the ideals instead. And in my eyes, being a police officer just represented everything good, everything that I wanted, everything noble in life. But of course I became disillusioned with authority relatively quickly when I was growing up, simply for the fact that obviously people always say to you, if you have any problems, tell an adult, tell your teachers, etc., etc. But then of course, them just being people, they're not necessarily going to care, nor do they necessarily know how to act to help any situation at all, because most people, not to judge them, but there are a lot of people out there who very much think that if a problem that somebody has doesn't directly involve them, well, it just isn't a problem at all, it isn't something that needs dealing with. And I always said when I was young, I just wish that somebody, even if it was just like some crazy homeless guy on the street, just grab me and just say, everybody that you are told to respect and look up to and to trust, parents, teachers, Paluche, they're all full of shit. Not that they're all bad people, but they're all just as confused about this world as you are. They're just trying to make their way through it. Probably would have made me cry, scared the crap out of me, but it would have stuck with me and I would have processed it and I would have taken it on board. And obviously, as a lot of children do, having to deal with bullying and what have you. And I never had it too bad because I did gymnastics when I was little. Like I had even 12 years old, I had like a rock solid body. Like you wouldn't fuck with me just because no matter what I tried to do, pushing you or whatever, there'd be a lot of force behind it. But just the mental assaults on my head, like I didn't like it, and everybody that I was told to trust and to seek help from was never able to do so or unwilling to do so. And so yeah, the ideals of ever becoming somebody like that just kind of flew out of my mind, because it just clicked to me that these people, it's literally a title and a presumption that these people are actually capable of helping in any manner, or they deserve to be in authority in some manner. So now, as far as the police actually just being regular people, ergo they're just as fallible as the rest of us. They can screw up, they can mess up. The police themselves, you have to understand, as I say, there are definitely a few branches that having such power effectively attracts. Like I said, I'm sure for me, while I wanted it to be to help people, and well, at least that's what I think looking back on it, I'm sure there was also a part of me that was thinking, yeah, I want to be able to perhaps not exert some power over other people, but to just have established power, even if that power was false and effectively it only came from a title that we are presumed automatically grants you all of these things. But it doesn't. Like, you can call yourself a genius, but if you're not actually smart, you're not a genius. So the police themselves obviously attract all manner of human beings, and they've had them all in the police force. I'm saying periodically during this video I'll be uploading, there was a gentleman who had a YouTube channel called Crime Bodge, who I did intend to link because I will be using a few screenshots that he has taken of published news articles, but unfortunately when I went back to find his video just to gather some more material, his entire channel has been suspended. because of course he fights against police corruption. I don't specifically know what's happened in the past month or so since then, but yeah, there are no videos on his channel anymore. He cannot upload nothing like that. However, thank you to his work, his research, freedom of information requests had been submitted to like every constabulary within England quite a while back, and not all of the police forces even gave up these statistics, but the ones that did, they were basically asked, like, how many offending officers do you have in your police force, crimes that have been committed, of how many. And for the ones that would actually supply any kind of statistics and just didn't outright fuse, despite the fact that they were legally obligated to do so, the worst offences ended up being drunk driving, hurting animals, and one of the other ones that I've seen has been domestic abuse. Quite a lot of police officers commit domestic abuse against their partners. And again, drunk driving being the worst. And there are some videos online where literally, I think it was an off-duty police officer, is just drunk as a skunk at the wheel. He gets pulled over by a police officer, and when the police officer realizes that it's another one of his fellow Paluche, he literally just gives him a high five, gets him in the back of the police car, and drives him home himself. I don't believe he lets him keep on driving. It's been a very long time since I've seen that. But I mean, those are statistically the crimes that are committed by the police the most. Drunk driving, come on, man. I can understand, as I was saying, the workload that you would have as a police officer. Like, it has to be heavy. It can't be the easiest job in the world, and I absolutely understand that, which is why I used to give them the utmost respect. Hurting animals, that's a really messed up one. But again, that's, as you know, like they say, a lot of psychopathic children that grow up to be psychopaths, the Jeffrey Dahmers of the world, tend to hurt animals when they were young. And again, apparently that's like the second highest crime that's actually committed by police officers, like exerting their power and authority upon literally innocent animals. I mean, how can you accuse an animal of a crime? They have no idea what they're doing. But for some reason, that's the second highest crime that is committed by the police, actually hurting animals. It's crazy, but again, it's that mentality, that power mentality. And I'm sure they probably get off the job thinking, oh, I wish I could have punched that person in the face, blah, blah, blah. They've no respect for the fact that they are supposed to be the stoic representative of law and order. And instead, it gets too personal for them. And the reason that such things like that actually take effect is because in order to become a Paluche, to be hired by them, other than these 3-month, I believe it is, course, to actually be fully trained and qualified to be arresting people, there's no psychological test or examination. I believe there is the briefest kind of psychoanalysis that is done on you, but it isn't done in any professional manner. That is trying to be aware, on the lookout for people that would abuse their power, that would enact their authority over innocent animals or innocent people. It's nothing like that. They're literally just making sure that you are competent enough that you can do the most basic of menial mental tasks, to actually just not straight up embarrass the order when you're walking around and you've got your little high-vis vest on backwards or something. And to put a good point forward about the quality of the Paluche, in 2005, there was a study done, I believe it was done in America, but if you think that American and English police are any different, I mean, it's literally just the fact that they have guns. And this 2005 study actually came out and found that your average policeman actually has a lower IQ than your average postman. And now that's crazy to think, because you'd think the person who's supposed to be representing law and order, the arbiters of authority, should be a little bit smarter than the guy who delivers your mail. But unfortunately, that simply, statistically, just isn't the case. And a lot of psychoanalysts, psychologists, and what have you, had a look at this, and they pretty much all came to the same conclusion, which is the reason that they hire people who score low on aptitude tests, is because if they were to hire smarter people, they would be more than likely possessing the mental faculties to process orders that are given to them if they're illegal. Whereas if you have somebody who's of a simpler mind, they're not going to understand if something that they're doing is illegal, nor would they necessarily care. The reason that they hire stupider people is effectively because police work is grunt work. You literally are a henchman for authority. coming to get me. And I think it shouldn't take. I think the majority of people would agree that if you are given the honor, the absolute honor of representing law and order in our society, if you are given that authority, it should go without saying that should you ever actually abuse that power, should you ever break any of those laws, particularly purposely, such as denying people a basic human right to water, there should be no question that you yourself should be punishable to the full extent of the law. There should be no leniency. There should be no debating whether you get the minimum punishment for it. You should get the maximum punishment for it, because you have abused the literal institution of power, the literal law, whilst you are receiving public taxpayer money to supposedly be upholding and representing that law. And I assume most people would agree with that, simply for the fact that it would be an absolutely disgusting thing for somebody to be given that, to be allowed to effectively have more rights, if you will, than any other citizen out there, and then go ahead and abuse those rights, arresting people, or lying about people, or falsifying police records, or whatever it is that they choose to do. And it should always, always be punishable by the fullest extent of the law. In my eyes, there should be absolutely no question about that. To give you an example of this, I've only ever had 3 altercations with the police in my life. One of them, obviously, is the incident that happened that I spoke of in my first video, to which I was arrested and sent to the Cheshire branch of Guantanamo Bay. And again, no water, lying to me about my legal advisor being in the building, but again, you can go watch that one for yourselves. The second one was a complete non-matter, like it was a mistake. The police ended up laughing about it because, again, it was literally just a mistake. And the third time is I went to a friend's house once, and he and I were just going to chill out, but it turns out his gig that he was doing was lasting a bit longer. So when I got there, it was his little brother and their friends that were hanging out. Because the family's very tight and that friendship group's always very tight, so I was just hanging out with them as well. And some PCSOs, ended up coming to the back gate where we were all sat, because they were inquiring about some stolen traffic signs or roadwork signs that they believed had been taken to this address. And so when they came in, my friend's little brother and all of his friends had bought like a fair amount of weed to be smoking. And the PCSOs obviously saw this, and at this point it was no longer an inquiry, and they had to call an actual police officer, because of course PCSOs literally have like no authority. They can't arrest you, they can't touch you, they can't stop and search you, nothing like that. So they had to call an actual police officer to come and do their dirty work for them. And there were 3 PCSOs that arrived originally, and then they had to call in the actual policeman after that. And we were all very respectful, sat there, let them have the whole thing. Nobody was back-chatting to them, nobody was talking smack to them. But then toward the very end, because my friend's little brothers were 17 at the time, because they were under 18, effectively, a letter would have to be sent to their parents, giving them this caution about what they've been doing. Because I was the only one at the time who was above 18, I was just thinking, obviously I need to clarify they're not going to send a letter to my parents, because that's just going to be a bit weird. So after they'd finished doing the whole thing, I said to the actual police officer, I just said, just to clarify, officer, because I'm over 18, I won't be receiving a letter to my house, right? And this fat PCSO, this humongous, this donut of a human being, this PCSO, immediately turns to the police officer and goes, I think we should arrest him anyway. I, of course, immediately turned to the PCSO and just go, are you kidding me? Are you threatening to arrest me for asking a question? The police officer immediately said to his friend, no, and then immediately changed to me. He goes, no, we're not arresting you. But I mean, that just goes to show you, thankfully, I assume this guy must have failed that most basic of like, hey, your high-vis vest is on backwards, you fucking idiot. That, and probably the size of him, like he was too big to even be like one of the joke policemen that you see where you're expecting them to be running down the street, but they themselves are carrying like 400 pounds worth of body weight. Just excess garbage human skin. And I immediately knew what this guy's whole trip was. I mean, I could have been wrong, but I guarantee you I was right with this. This guy was, for being so fucking fat and stupid, was absolutely bullied in school. But then instead of doing what most human beings do that experience that, where they grow up and think like, right, I know what it's like to be treated like that. I'm not going to treat another human being like that. I'm going to be better than that. He goes the complete opposite. His entire life becomes built around this grudge that he has to the world. And this is the kind of human being that then becomes a PCSO, simply for the fact that he just gets that slither of power, that slither of authority, unquestionable authority, allegedly, in which he can enact upon other human beings just to make them feel as small as he did as a child. Obviously, small being the operative word, because he was a fat cunt. That is the kind of thing that such positions of authority can attract, and that's why it needs to be so well handled in who you hire and exactly how you punish them. And I know just saying, oh well, if you ever do break the law, it might not necessarily be a constant deterrent to them to know that they could be punished to the full extent of the law, but the fact is that simply needs to be the case so that people like this don't end up turning what should be one of the most sacred, noble, honorable jobs in our society into a personal power trip for them. Like, that's not the way that it should be. That's not what should be on offer when you become a policeman, or a PCSO in this asshole's case. Threatening to arrest me for asking for clarification on the law. Not even threatening to arrest me, telling the police officer that he should threaten to arrest me, or just should arrest me because he's a PCSO and he doesn't have the power himself. So to give you a good example of how bad the actual Paluche situation can get, and again, these sociopaths, occasionally psychopaths that are hurting small animals, it can actually get to, we'll get to the case of Sarah Everard, the young one, well, I think she was 33, who was murdered by an off-duty police officer. And now that's a name that I'm sure the majority of people watching would still remember, because this was a very relatively recent event. And the situation was that she was abducted by an off-duty police officer while walking back home to her flat, and she was raped and murdered and left her body disposed of in the woods by this off-duty police officer. And this police officer was technically busted 3 days prior. He himself was not busted, but he had committed another offense, indecent exposure at McDonald's, I think it was, to the staff. Like, it whipped out his tiny little junk. And they'd caught him. They'd also caught the car that he had rented a car. I believe it was the rented car. And they had the license, the registration plate of it, and they gave it to the police. And this is 3 days prior to him murdering this poor girl. And the police, by their own official wording, the reason that was never followed up on, despite the fact that they had him on CCTV, they had the car on CCTV, the license plate, they never chased it up because they just didn't have time to investigate. And now chances are, people who know how corrupt the police actually are know that they will have ran that. They will have found out who it was and just thought, we can't do this to one of our own, it's going to look bad on us. Doesn't matter about what the law is, it's just going to look bad on our organization. We need to preserve the perception of our integrity. And 3 days later, that same guy who exposed himself in McDonald's went on and murdered somebody, actually murdered somebody. Somebody who, I don't even know if it would have been earlier that very same day, would have been literally wearing the Paluche uniform, arresting people, exerting his authority over them. And then later on that day, he goes and murders another human being, rapes and murders another human being. I've actually written here that the car registration plate was never run. I don't know if that's what I've actually written. I don't know if that was precisely what I read, forgive me. But either way, the police, as I was saying, just simply by their own admission, didn't have time to investigate this flash. I do believe they knew who it was. And regardless of that, even if they didn't, the exact same police officer in 2015 had actually exposed himself. I can't remember the exact circumstances of that. But again, this is like a one-off day for this guy. This gentleman was going around doing these sorts of things on a regular occasion, and then to the point he ended up becoming the Paluche security at an embassy in London, and he actually had access to a firearm. And this guy was known as the rapist at one of his previous jobs when he used to guard nuclear facilities, I believe it was. He was known by his colleagues as the rapist for the way that he treated women, like his fellow colleagues. And this guy, again, just all of this just somehow just never quite made it to the police, nor did his constant actions, because there's no way this gentleman changed. I mean, he went from being known as the rapist to raping and murdering a woman while he was a police officer. There's no way that the police never would have had a bad word to say about this guy. It's absolutely impossible. And this came to the point, as I say, the police had effectively covered from. They didn't have time to investigate. They definitely did run the license plate. I'm so sorry. The police didn't have time to investigate, of course, when they had realised that it was one of their own who had been exposing himself in the McDonald's. Simply for the fact that as it's come out when they finally had to get him on the murder charge, that's because, of course, until before they knew that it was this gentleman as if this monster who was under their employment being paid with public taxpayer money, they've effectively had the public in such a fervour, and they've been going, oh, we're the Paluche, we're going to investigate this, you can all trust us, you can always trust us, don't you worry about it. But I mean, do you truly believe the way they've covered for themselves and people in the past, including this very same gentleman, do you truly believe that they would have let that be the case, that they would have arrested him if there wasn't such a public fervour about it? More than likely, it's the fact that it had been whipped up into such a fervour. Like, the British public was absolutely appalled by this, as they are by any rape and murder case, doesn't matter who it's committed by. That effectively there was no covering for this gentleman. Now they had to sacrifice him because there were too many eyes on this case, that if all of a sudden they just wink wink, nudge nudge, didn't have time to investigate at that moment, I mean, that just would have been it. The Paluche's cover would have been absolutely fucking blown. There's no way that you could come back from that. They had to sacrifice this officer. And just to show you how potentially dodgy that was, since his arrest, there were, I believe it was 12 or 33 officers that had accessed the case file, that had accessed the Paluche records about the Sarah Everard case. And obviously it's been put forward to the public that they're always hoping that it was just morbid curiosity that had them access this case. However, there are a great many people that believe that this was done so the Paluche would in fact know where to go to cover up certain things, or what they would need to put a spin on to effectively save themselves and save their reputation about the fact that they had hired somebody who literally was known as the rapist, somebody who had already been busted for indecently exposing himself. And with things like that, so when I was saying 12 or 33, because there was another number of officers who had they got investigated by the Independent Office of Police Conduct, because they themselves had effectively without a doubt, tried to cover for this gentleman. I believe this was over the exposing incident 3 days prior to him murdering Sarah Everard. And now, in my eyes, again, the first hint of any kind of cover-up officially, where effectively the police have been shown to break the law, whether it's rape, whether it's murder, whether it's coincidentally failing to investigate one of their own officers breaking the law, whether it's them denying you your basic human rights. The simple fact is, there's always going to be a couple of bad people in every situation. Like, nobody is perfect. But when you have an institution such as the Paluche, that have an officer that has without a doubt broken the law, is guilty of it, has done an indecent offence, or just a horrific offence, a horrific crime, if that institution takes even one step in the direction of trying to cover for that person, or cover for themselves, or do damage control in that sense, in my eyes, that entire institution needs to be null and void. It will be okay to have an underling, again, a henchman, somebody doing their grunt work to break the law, if the institution then decide that person is going to be punished, fired, imprisoned, whatever it is. But the second that they instead decide to take the opposite approach and try and cover for that person, try and cover for themselves, whether it's the drunk drivers, whether it's the ones hurting animals, whether it's the ones beating the living shit out of their spouses, the second that the people who are supposed to be enacting the utmost authority in our land, the basic rules that we have to get along with each other as a society, not that it's actually that hard to get along with anybody, but these are there just to say, hey, this is my land, this is your land, let's all hold hands and love each other. The second an institution that has an underling, the second specifically the police institution has an underling that goes and breaks the law, and the police decides to make it their agenda to instead cover for that person and to erase any blemish, any stain that they have put on that institution, that says to me that entire institution is corrupt, because the fact that they have seen corruption, they have seen laws broken, and then decide to just walk directly along that path, because they're too far gone, and I suppose they're hoping that if they just go down that path far enough, nobody will actually be able to see them, or it'll be too late to do anything about it at that point. And that can't be the way it is. You're never going to earn the trust from the public, especially not the trust of nobody, if the only reaction that you have to corruption or to people breaking the laws when you are supposed to be representing the laws is to instead cover for those things. You have no right being in that position. You have no right being in that position, and it's astonishing. And again, you yourself deserve to be punished to the fullest extent of the law. No leniency, no leniency. You have taken one of the greatest, albeit burdens, by becoming a police officer, by joining the Paluche. But then to instead turn around and use that faith that is put in you by the public, that presumptive faith that we're all supposed to have in the police, that is put in you by the public, you turn around and instead use that for your own ends, to enact abuse over other people, to enact power over other people, to murder other people. And then the people that gave you that power decide to make it their prerogative to instead cover for you, to stand up for you. That entire institution is null and void in my eyes. You cannot call that a legitimate institution unless, again, they are just a fucking crime ring. So this is also when it comes down to the thing. There are why are the police allowed to investigate their own crimes when it's been shown time and time again that they're in fact covering for their own crimes? As I say, which just let alone just what happened to me when I was detained. The fact that I have spent 3 months and there's not been a whiff, there's not been one honest police officer who's ever actually acknowledged the bad things that have happened. They have broken their own backs, sniffing their own shite, trying to cover for each other and to cover for themselves, because they don't want a whiff of their corruption, a whiff of the laws that they have broken, the deeds that they have done, to actually be known and exposed to the public. So why when they have done things like this time and time again, long before I was even born, they've been doing this, and it's been thoroughly documented as best it can, though they don't give out all the statistics about the fucking psychopaths that they have in their employment. Why are they allowed legally to investigate themselves, only to decide that nah, we didn't do anything, or we don't have time to investigate actually, so we'll just leave you on hold for 3 months. Again, we have the IOPC, which was itself a corrupt organization. I would like to give a personal analogy of that so far, but as I say, I cannot have the IOPC dealing with my police complaints until the Paluche give me their final resolution. 3 months in the waiting, Paluche, their final resolution to my complaints and the laws, the basic human rights laws that were broken against me. So unfortunately, I don't have any personal experience with the IOPC, though there are many a story out there that say they're a corrupt organization. I do believe they've had like a big shake-up a couple of years ago, and I can't speak to the quality of what the new organization is. It could just be a matter of a same filthy, dirty old pig rolling around its own shit, but just with a bow on top of it this time, a slightly better looking, slightly better scent coming off of this thing. Somebody's tagged a little air freshener around its neck. It simply shouldn't be that way. That the police have the first port of call to investigate their own corruption, their own crimes. Because as we see, it's not going to take them that much work to cover for themselves or to purposely fuck up an investigation into themselves that display the corruption that they've done. And then, or just to say to you, no, we've decided we didn't break the laws. And how can you ever ask? You ask the police once they've broken the law to investigate their own breaking of the law, and they come back to you and going, well, guess what, guys, we investigated ourselves and we found out we did absolutely nothing wrong. You don't need to worry about it anymore. How can that be anything that is supposed to be a legitimate organization in the eyes of the public? It simply isn't. It would be like me after I've been arrested, the police just turning around, or me just turning around going, you know what, guys, I don't need to be arrested today. I'm going to do my own investigation into myself to see if I broke the law and to see if I need to be charged. And then I'm going to come back and just go, oh no, guess what, guys, I found out I don't need to be charged. It's all a big misunderstanding. Don't worry about a damn thing. You wouldn't allow me to do that. And yet, if I was wearing a high-vis vest, all of a sudden I would be allowed to do that. And just, again, to give you an idea, it's like the police aren't smart enough to be doing things like this. So the police entrance exam, if you will, is all multiple choice, including a maths question to test your intellect, just to see who you really are. So what is 5 times 5? Is it 5? Is it 7? Is it 25? Is it 1068? Is it 50 billion? Don't know. It's probably going to take a really smart human being to possibly figure out that it might be C. It just might be C. There we go. I will say as well, in my dealing, the Paluche finally, a week before we're due in trial, and I'll be found guilty or not guilty, they finally got around to submitting the actual evidence, not descriptions of evidence to us, the body cam footage. And of course, as my solicitor immediately pointed out, they submitted clip 1 of 3, clip 2 of 3, but we never got a clip 3 of 3, which happens to be the police officer. I'm assuming it happens to be the one where the police officer is calling me an asshole, threatening to break personal property of mine, the most sacred religious icon to the Christian faith worldwide. Because again, they don't give a shit. They don't give a shit about whether you're guilty or innocent. They need their statistics to be bumped up. That's all that they're concerned about. That's all they're concerned about. And likewise, if there's any chance that they could get exposed with their bare asses to the world for having hired for their henchmen, having broken the laws, despite being paid with public taxpayer money to represent those laws, they're going to go above and beyond. They're going to finally do some actual police work, only in the sense that they're going to cover for themselves, as opposed to actually investigating themselves, because they don't want to be exposed for the relatively shitty organization. We're talking that they'd be getting 1-star reviews from many people if this was a restaurant or something. The shittiest service to the public we've ever fucking known. Quite frankly, I'm more than happy to be eating a tuna and sweet corn sandwich in a tent than receiving whatever pile of steaming shit the Paluche would serve up to me.